22nd and 23rd of January 1879 are dates etched into the annals of the British Army, dates in which the Army would see one of its greatest defeats to one of its greatest victories. Lord Chelmsford had ordered the invasion into Zululand on the 11th of January 1879. His plan was simple: to approach the Zulu capital of Ulundi in 3 columns, the North Column under the command of Colonel Evelyn Wood, the East Column commanded by Colonel Charles Pearson, and the Centre Column under command of Colonel Richard Glynn, though Lord Chelmsford himself rode with this column and would interfere with the command. After a minor victory at Shaheo's Corral, the initial entry of all 3 columns was unopposed. Glynn's column, with Chelmsford and his staff, advanced to the odd-shaped hill, Isandlwana. The column arrived on the 20th of January and immediately set up camp. The camp was to be a temporary halt, but Chelmsford did not follow traditional practice to entrench, nor was there a laager, a circling of wagons formed. Chelmsford did not see the need for one, stating it would take a week to make one. But the chief reason for the failure to take defensive precautions appears to have been that the British command severely underestimated the Zulus' capabilities. On the morning of the 22nd of January, Lord Chelmsford split his forces and moved out to support a reconnoitring party, leaving the remaining 1,300 men of the column under the command of Colonel Pauline. An order was sent to Colonel Durnford to move his men from Rorke's Drift to reinforce the camp. At around 10:30 am, Colonel Anthony Durnford arrived with 500 men of the Natal native contingent and a rocket battery of the No. 2 column. Reports of Zulu movements were confused, and the exact location of the Zulu army was unknown. The truth was that the Zulu were able to exploit the terrain to avoid detection and outmanoeuvred the British, sweeping between Chelmsford and the camp at Isandlwana. The Zulus intended to attack the British camp on the 23rd, but the main Zulu force was discovered at around 11 am by men of Lieutenant Charles Raw's troop of scouts, who chased a number of Zulus into a valley, only then seeing most of the 20,000 men of the main enemy force sitting in total quiet. The Zulus at once sprang into action and were committed into a pitched battle. The horns and chest formation was deployed with the aim of encircling the British position. From Pauline's advantage point in the camp, at first only the right horn and then the chest of the attack seemed to be developing. Pauline sent out first 1, then all 6 companies of the 24th Foot into an extended firing line, with the aim of meeting the Zulu attack head-on and checking it with firepower. Durnford rode out, and upon meeting elements of the Zulu centre, he retreated to a dried-out watercourse on the British right flank, where they formed a defensive line. After about 20 minutes of firing, Pauline ordered his companies in the firing line slightly closer to the camp. For an hour or so, the disciplined British volleys pinned down the Zulu centre, inflicting many casualties and causing the advance to stall. Durnford's men, who had been fighting the longest, began to withdraw, and their rate of fire diminished. Durnford's withdrawal exposed the right flank of the British regulars, with which the general threat of the Zulu encirclement caused Pauline to order a withdrawal back to camp. The regulars' retreat was performed with order and discipline, and the men of the 24th conducted a fighting withdrawal into the camp. Durnford's retreat, however, exposed the flank of G Company, which was quickly overrun. The British continued to fire steadily into the oncoming Zulus, but they began to run out of ammunition. Runners were sent back for more, but faced a long wait as the lids to the ammunition boxes were screwed shut. Below the lid was a tin lid that had to be peeled back, and the bullets then in paper packets. Once their ammunition had run out, Surviving British soldiers had no choice but to fight on with bayonet and rifle butt. A Zulu account tells of the single-handed fight by the guard of Chelmsford Tent, a big Irishman of the 24th who kept the Zulus back with his bayonet until he was finally speared and the General's Union flag captured. Both of the colours of the 2nd 24th were lost, while the Queen's colour of the 1st 24th was carried off the field by Lieutenant Melville on horseback, but lost when he crossed the river. Despite Lieutenant Coghill having come to his aid, both Melville and Coghill were killed after crossing the river, and later received Victoria Crosses in 1907. An officer in advance of Chelmsford Force gave his eyewitness account of the final stage of the battle at about 3 p.m. In a few seconds we distinctly saw the guns fired again, one after the other, sharp. This was done several times, a pause, and then a flash, flash. The sun was shining on the camp at the time, and then the camp looked dark, just as if a shadow passed over it. The guns did not fire after that, and in a few minutes all the tents had disappeared. The same moment is described in a Zulu warrior's account. The sun turned black in the middle of the battle. We could still see it over us, or should have thought we were fighting till evening. Then we got into camp, and there was a great deal of smoke and firing. Afterwards the sun came out bright again. Of the 1,800 plus force of British troops and African auxiliaries, over 1,300 were killed, most of them Europeans, including Field Commanders Pauline and Durnford. Zulu losses were never recorded, but historians put the number between 1,500 and 2,000 dead, with hundreds more wounded. The battle was a decisive victory for the Zulus, and the British Army had suffered its worst defeat against an indigenous foe, equipped with vastly inferior military technology. The Zulu reserve of 3 regiments that had not engaged in the Battle of Isandlwana decided to break off from the main force and attack the mission station at Rorke's Drift, which the British had turned into a supply depot and hospital under the overall command of Major Henry Spalding, a member of Chelmsford staff. Sometime around noon on the 22nd of January, Major Spalding left the station for Helpmeeka to ascertain the whereabouts of promised reinforcements, which were now long overdue. Leaving an engineer, Lieutenant John Rouse Merriard Chard, in temporary command. Soon thereafter, 2 survivors from Isandlwana, Lieutenant Gert Ardenarf, a trooper of the Natal Carbineers, arrived bearing the news of the defeat and that part of the Zulu Impi was approaching the station. Upon hearing this news, Chard, Lieutenant Gonville Bromhead, and another of the station's officers, Acting Assistant Commissionary James Dalton, held a quick meeting to decide the best course of action, whether to attempt a retreat to Helpmeeka or to defend their current position. Dalton pointed out that a small column travelling in open country and burdened with carts full of hospital patients would be easily overtaken and defeated by a numerically superior Zulu force, and so it was soon agreed that the only acceptable course was to remain and fight. Chard and Bromhead directed their men to make preparations to defend the station. With the garrison's 400-odd men working diligently, a defensive perimeter was quickly constructed out of mealie bags, biscuit boxes and crates of tinned meat. This perimeter incorporated the storehouse, the hospital and a stout stone corral. The buildings were fortified with loopholes, knocked through the external walls, and the external doors barricaded with furniture. At around 3:30 p.m, a mixed troop of about 100 Natal native horse under Lieutenant Alfred Henderson arrived at the station after having retreated in good order from Isandlwana. With the defences nearing completion and battle approaching, Chard now had several hundred men available to him, a force that was sufficient, in Chard's estimation, to fend off the Zulus. By the time the Zulus reached Rorke's Drift at 4:30 p.m, they had fast marched some 20 miles, but were still in excellent condition to give battle. The Zulu commander was Prince W. Manzi, brother of the Zulu king Cetshwayo, who acted against the king's orders of not attacking the British in fortified defences. Soon after, the battle began with Lieutenant Henderson's NNH troopers briefly engaging the vanguard of the main Zulu force. However, tired from the battle at Isandlwana and retreat to Rorke's Drift, as well as being short of carbine ammunition, Henderson's men departed for Helpmeka. Henderson himself reported to Lieutenant Chard the enemy were close at hand, and that his men would not obey his orders and were going off to Helpmeka. Henderson then followed his departing men. Upon witnessing the withdrawal of Henderson's troops, Captain Stevenson's NNC company abandoned the cattle corral and fled, greatly reducing the strength of the defending garrison. Outraged that Stevenson and some of his troops had also fled from the barricades, a few British soldiers fired at them, killing Corporal William Anderson. The garrison now numbered around 156 men. Over the next few hours, the Zulus would make piecemeal attacks, which were repulsed. Those on the barricade were engaged in fierce hand-to-hand fighting. The British wall was too high for the Zulus to scale, so they resorted to crouching under the wall, trying to get a hold of the defenders' rifles, slashing at British soldiers with assegais or firing their weapons through the wall. At places, they climbed over each other's bodies to drive the British off the walls, but were driven back. Chard realised that the north wall, under near constant attack from the Zulus, could not be held. At 6 p.m, he pulled his men back into the yard, abandoning the two front rooms of the hospital in the process. The hospital was becoming untenable. The loopholes had become a liability, as rifles poking out were grabbed at by the Zulus. Yet if the holes were left empty, the Zulu warriors stuck their own weapons through in order to fire into the rooms. The hospital was set on fire, and a desperate fight ensued from room to room as the defenders retreated. Of the 11 patients, 9 survived the trip to the barricade, as did all the able-bodied men. The evacuation of the burning hospital completed the shortening of the perimeter. As night fell, the Zulu attacks grew stronger. The cattle corral came under renewed assault and was evacuated at 10 p.m, leaving the remaining men in the small bastion around the storehouse. The British troops had withdrawn to the centre of the station, where a final defence had been hastily built. Throughout the night, the Zulus kept up a constant assault against the British positions. Zulu attacks began to slacken only after midnight, ending by 2 a.m, and replaced by harassing fire from Zulu firearms until 4 a.m. As dawn broke, the British could see that the Zulus were gone. All that remained were the dead and severely wounded. Patrols were dispatched to scout the battlefield, recover rifles, and look for survivors, many of whom were killed when found. At roughly 7 a.m, an impi of Zulus suddenly appeared, and the British manned their positions again. No attack materialised, and at around 8 a.m, another force appeared, and the defenders left their breakfast to man their positions. However, the force turned out to be the vanguard of Lord Chelmsford Relief Column. 11 Victoria Crosses were awarded to the defenders of Rorke's Drift, 7 of them to soldiers of the 2nd Battalion 24 Foot, the most ever received for a single action by one regiment. This was partly to distract the public from the disastrous defeat at Isandlwana. At the end of the fighting, 400 Zulus lay dead on the battlefield. Only 17 British were killed, but almost every man in the garrison had sustained some kind of wound. While the British Central Column under Chelmsford Command was thus engaged at Isandlwana and Rorke's Drift, the right flank column on the coast under Colonel Charles Pearson across the Tualenga River, skirmished with a Zulu impi that was attempting to set up an ambush in the Inyezane River, and advanced as far as the deserted missionary station of Isho, which he set about fortifying. On learning of the disaster at Isandlwana, Pearson made plans to withdraw back to the Tualenga River. However, before he had decided whether or not to put these plans into effect, the Zulu army managed to cut off his supply lines, and the siege of Esho had begun. Meanwhile, the left flank column at Utrecht, under Colonel Evelyn Wood, had originally been charged with occupying the Zulu tribes of the northwest Zululand and preventing them from interfering with the British Central Column's advance on Ulundi. To this end, Wood set up camp at Tinginga's Corral, just 10 miles south of Helbane Mountain, where a force of 4,000 Zulus had been spotted. He planned to attack them on the 24th of January, but on learning of the disaster at Isandlwana, he decided to withdraw back to the Corral. Thus, 1 month after the British invasion, only their left flank column remained military effective, and it was too weak to conduct a campaign alone. The first invasion of Zululand had been a failure.